To be the second part of the lesson, and sometimes I call this a lesson on contractions, sometimes I call it a lesson on commonly confused words, sometimes I call it the could've, would've, should've lesson. So I want you to first of all open up the PDF that I've attached to the document, and it's going to say could've, would've, should've lesson PDF, and so that's what I have in front of me here. You are probably going to have to turn the orientation of the paper because unfortunately it's photocopied on its side, but you can do that here. Just take a moment now and move it so that it looks the same as mine. So this is actually the appendix of a book that I often use with my English 101 students called It Was the Best of Sentences, It Was the Worst of Sentences. And it's a fun little book that an English major like myself would love that just gives advice on how to be the best writer possible. And this particular appendix, the author has labeled the deadliest catches, the most incriminating errors and how to avoid them. So I'm going to read for you the first 4 paragraphs here, as I do every year when I teach this lesson to my students, because I think you need to hear from a writer about how some mistakes are more important or more serious than others. So go ahead and follow along with me as I read this one to you. Everyone makes typos. Less experienced writers are often mortified by them, but there's no need to be. Even the most meticulous pros let a typo slip once in a while, and the best editors and proofreaders fail to catch them all. If you misspell lead as lead on occasion, no reasonable editor or reader will think any less of you. But there are mistakes and there are mistakes. Some are understandable. Others are code for, I'm a rank amateur. If I see its apostrophe s in place of its no apostrophe a single time in an article, I assume the writer made a typo. If I see it twice, that's a whole different story. That tells me, and a lot of other writers, editors, wordsmiths, and grammar files I know, that the writer is out of her element. She's not a pro. The grouchier among us might use words like semi-literate and hack. So instead of agonizing over how to avoid every single typo, channel your energy into the important ones. Here is my list of iconic mistakes, ones that really do make you look bad. My selection process wasn't exactly scientific. These are just the errors that, in my experience, are most likely to inspire eye rolls and unkind thoughts about a writer's skill level. So at this point, I am going to encourage you to stop the video for a moment and actually look through the rest of the PDF. So hopefully when you look through the rest of the PDF, and you've got several pages here, and again, you'd have to flip them on your side if it's like mine and you got to see them, but you'll notice that there are very common errors. A lot of you wrestle with there, and there. A lot of you wrestle with to and to. Some of them are verb problems, some of them are apostrophe problems. So the one that I am going to encourage you the most to pay attention to is this issue right here. Could've, would've, should've. So this, in my mind, demonstrates that a person is not a reader. They might be intelligent, but if I see this error, it tells me that their spelling skills are based off of what they're hearing rather than what they're reading. So here's why I call it a contractions lesson, because we need to understand where this error is coming from. So first let's read the paragraph and then let's talk about it. These errors are always wrong, always. There is never a time when these 3 phrases should ever show up in your paper. They should be could have, would have, and should have, or less formally, the contraction could have, would have, and should have. That's because of is not a verb, and therefore it can't be used to form verb tenses. Modal auxiliaries like could and should can work this way with the main auxiliaries have, be, and do, but not with the preposition of. So let me try to explain in proper plain English so that you guys are going to understand. Basically, if a person writes could of, would of, should of, and uses of as a preposition, what that tells me is They know what it sounds like when people speak the sentence, but they're not actively thinking about the grammar, right? They don't visually have in their head would contraction v, right? Contractions are when we put two words together with an apostrophe between them, so we've connected them to make a brand new word. So this is would have with two letters taken out of it. Should have with the HA taken out of it, right? Could have with the HA. So if a person is spelling it this way, it tells me that they've listened to people talk a lot, but they haven't read enough to recognize the grammar themselves. So that's why I think that it's one of the more important mistakes that people make, because lots of professional people still screw up its and its, and this sort of gives everybody the heebie-jeebies every once in a while. But this one right here tells me you're not a reader. So I don't want your professor someday to think of you as not a reader. So I would like you to keep your eye out for this, okay? And it happens. It happens occasionally, even with some of you who have gotten A's with me in this class. It can pop up, and if you know that you're a person where it does pop up, it's easily fixable by paying attention to the next video that I have using the find feature to help you out. The other thing that I just want to tell you is a couple years ago when I was doing this would have, could have, should have lesson, I had a girl who suddenly had her own epiphany about contractions. She told me that she had been using a friend of hers that she had used to go to school with when she was in elementary or middle school. She'd moved into the district from the Chicago area. And this friend of hers who was editing her paper would get super mad at her whenever she would use any contraction. Any contraction. Don't, won't, can't, whatever. And he would just ream her. And she couldn't figure out why. She asked him, and he said that the nun that taught English at his Catholic school hated contractions, and she wouldn't let them use contractions. So therefore, he was kind of hammering down on her. So what I told her and what gave her her aha moment is that there are a lot of professors that have some weird nitpicky things. And certainly you might have a lot of professors that don't like how informal the idea of contractions can be. So if you run into a teacher like that who tells you straight up at the beginning of class, don't do this, then one of your jobs in college as a writer is to avoid doing that in that one class with that one professor. It's like a lesson in, okay, pay attention to your audience and give them what they want. And if what they want is no contractions, then just know there are some really grouchy people out there who grade papers who don't like contractions. For my part, I am just going to say this. I probably won't highlight or get down on you for using a contraction unless two things happen. One, the grammar of the sentence becomes kind of confusing, and I feel like for clarity's sake, not using the contraction would have helped. And two, sometimes it's a tone issue, because when we use contractions, they're less formal. And sometimes when you guys want to heighten your language, when you want to sound passionate, when you want to give a real emotional quality, especially to a conclusion, then don't use contractions, right? If you're elevating your language, one of the easiest ways to elevate your language is to just not use slangy, informal terms. And you can do that very easily at key moments like the conclusion, where you just avoid using contractions in that way. So that's the basic lesson this time around. Pay attention to could of, would of, should of, and stay away from it so you don't make my skin crawl when I see it. Take a look at this list and make sure that there's nothing else that you can do. And then hopefully you'll be able to figure out what your personal problems are and kind of monitor them and use the next step of the 3-part lesson to help you find and replace or at least evaluate and fix them.